In the quiet corridors of a private London hospital, where whispered conversations carry the weight of worry and hope mingles with fear, a mother's heart beats with an intensity that drowns out everything else. When the person you love most in the world lies vulnerable behind closed doors, every second stretches into eternity. For Carole Middleton, the woman who had watched her daughter grow from a spirited child into the Princess of Wales, this moment would test every fiber of her being. What happens when royal protocol meets raw maternal instinct? When the careful choreography of palace life gives way to the messy, beautiful reality of family love. This is the story of a mother who refused to let titles and traditions keep her from her daughter's side, and a daughter who needed her mother more than ever before. The world knew Catherine as the Princess of Wales, the poised figure who graced magazine covers and carried herself with regal dignity. But in that hospital room, she was simply a daughter who had undergone major surgery, and Carole Middleton was simply a mother whose heart was breaking with worry and overflowing with love. The January morning arrived with a crispness that seemed to cut through London's usual gray haze. Carole Middleton stood at her kitchen window in Bucklebury, watching frost patterns dance across the glass while her coffee grew cold in her hands. Sleep had abandoned her completely 3 nights ago when William had called with news that would shake any mother to her core. Mom, his voice had carried a weight she had never heard before, not even during his most difficult times. Catherine needs surgery, abdominal surgery. We don't know everything yet, but it's serious. The world had stopped spinning in that moment. Carole had raised 3 children, weathered countless scraped knees and broken hearts, but nothing had prepared her for the reality that her eldest daughter might be in real danger. Catherine, her Kate, who had always been the strong one, the one who faced every challenge with that quiet determination that had first caught Prince William's eye at university. Michael found her still standing at the window an hour later, her reflection ghost-like against the morning light. He didn't say anything, simply wrapped his arms around her shoulders and let her lean into his familiar warmth. They had been married for over 40 years, and he knew when words would help and when silence was the only comfort he could offer. "She's going to be fine," he whispered finally, his voice rough with his own worry. "She's stronger than all of us." Carole nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to everything that could go wrong. As a mother, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to imagine worst-case scenarios, and surgery involving her daughter triggered every protective instinct she possessed. The royal family had their own medical team, their own protocols, their own way of handling crises, but none of that mattered to a mother's heart. The phone calls began shortly after breakfast. First, it was Pippa, her voice tight with concern as she tried to maintain her usual composure. "Have you heard anything else? James is driving up from London. We should all be together." Then came James himself, their youngest, who had inherited his father's steady nature, but whose voice cracked slightly when he asked, "Is there anything we can do?" "Anything at all." The hardest part was the waiting. Carole had always been a woman of action, someone who solved problems by rolling up her sleeves and getting to work. When the children were small and one of them fell ill, she knew exactly what to do. She could make soup, check temperatures, provide comfort, and feel useful. But royal medical procedures happened behind closed doors, surrounded by security and protocol that kept even family at a careful distance. William called again that afternoon. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," he said, and Carole could hear the strain in his voice. "They're saying 6 to 8 hours. Maybe longer." "I want to be there," Carole said immediately, her maternal instincts overriding any consideration of royal protocol. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I know you do, Mom. And Catherine wants you there too. We'll make it work." That evening, Carole packed a small bag with the efficiency of someone who had learned to travel light, but prepare for anything. She included Catherine's favorite lavender hand cream, the one she had used since university, and the small silver frame that held a picture of all 3 of her children from Christmas morning 10 years ago. They were small things, but sometimes small things carried the biggest comfort. The drive to London felt both endless and too short. Michael drove while Carole stared out the window at the countryside she knew by heart, thinking about all the times she had made this same journey for happier occasions. Catherine's graduation, her engagement announcement, countless family dinners where they had all crowded around the table and talked over each other like any normal family. But this wasn't any normal family, and Catherine wasn't just any daughter. She was the Princess of Wales, the future queen consort, a woman whose every public moment was scrutinized and analyzed. The weight of that responsibility had never felt heavier than it did now, when all Carole wanted was to hold her daughter's hand and tell her everything would be all right. They arrived at the private hospital just as the sun was setting, painting the building's windows gold. Security was discreet but thorough, and Carole found herself guided through corridors she would never have seen as an ordinary visitor. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and hope, a combination that made her stomach clench with memories of other medical emergencies, other times when fear had made her world feel fragile and uncertain. William met them in a small family waiting room that had been cleared for their use. He looked older than his years, the weight of worry etched in the lines around his eyes. When he hugged Carole, she could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself together through sheer force of will. "How is she?" Carole asked, searching his face for any hint of reassurance. "Scared," William admitted, and the honesty in his voice nearly broke her heart. "She's trying to be brave, you know how she is, but she's scared. The children don't know yet. We thought it was better to wait until after the surgery to explain anything to them." Carole nodded, understanding completely. George, Charlotte, and Louis were still so young, and the idea of their mother undergoing major surgery would be terrifying for them. There would be time for explanations later, time for careful conversations about why Mummy needed to rest and get better. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her smile professional but kind. "Mrs. Middleton, the princess has been asking for you. If you'd like to see her before the surgery tomorrow morning." Carole's heart began racing as she followed the nurse down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Each step brought her closer to her daughter, but also closer to the reality of what was about to happen. Surgery was always serious, but abdominal surgery carried its own particular risks and complications. They stopped outside a door marked only with a number, nothing to indicate the royal status of the patient inside. The nurse knocked softly before opening the door, and Carole stepped inside to find Catherine sitting in a hospital gown that made her look younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. Their eyes met across the small room, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Catherine smiled, that same smile she had worn as a little girl when she was trying to be brave about something that frightened her. "Hello, Mummy," she said softly, using the childhood name that she had never quite grown out of in private moments. Carole crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled her daughter into her arms, being careful of the 4-line that snaked from Catherine's hand to a bag of clear fluid hanging nearby. Catherine felt smaller than she should have, more fragile, and Carole had to fight back tears as she held her close. "I'm here," she whispered against Catherine's hair, which smelled like the same shampoo she had used since she was 16. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." They talked for an hour about everything and nothing. Catherine asked about the garden at home, about whether the daffodils were starting to come up yet, about Lupo, and whether he was missing his walks in the woods behind the house. They were the kinds of conversations that families have when they're trying not to think about scary things, when normal life feels like the most precious gift in the world. When visiting hours ended, Carole kissed her daughter's forehead and promised to be there first thing in the morning. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she said, meaning every word. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal after the warmth of Catherine's hospital room. Carole lay awake listening to Michael's steady breathing and watching the clock's red numbers change with agonizing slowness. Tomorrow would bring the surgery, and then the waiting, and then hopefully the relief of hearing that everything had gone well. But tonight, all she could do was lie in the darkness and remember every scraped knee she had kissed better, every nightmare she had chased away, every moment when being a mother had felt like the most important job in the world. Tomorrow would test that role in ways she had never imagined, but tonight she simply held on to love and hope with equal measure. Dawn broke gray and cold over London, the kind of January morning that made everyone want to stay inside where warmth and safety lived. Carole had been awake since 4, her body refusing to acknowledge that sleep might have been useful. She dressed carefully in comfortable clothes that wouldn't wrinkle from long hours of sitting, and chose the small gold cross necklace that Catherine had given her for Mother's Day 5 years ago. The hospital corridors felt different at 6 in the morning. They echoed with the quiet efficiency of night shift nurses finishing their rounds and day staff beginning theirs. Carole and Michael walked side by side, their footsteps the only sound in the hushed hallways, both lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. William was already in Catherine's room when they arrived, sitting in the chair beside her bed and holding her hand while she dozed fitfully. He looked up when they entered, his face drawn but determined. "She had a rough night," he said quietly. "Nervous about everything." Catherine stirred at the sound of voices and opened her eyes, blinking in the soft morning light filtering through the window. When she saw her parents, her face relaxed into something that looked almost like relief. "You're here early," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Carole said, settling into the chair on the other side of the bed. She reached for Catherine's free hand, noting how cold her fingers felt despite the warm room. The next few hours passed in a strange mixture of mundane hospital routine and heart-stopping awareness of what was coming. Nurses appeared regularly to check vital signs and ask questions. An anesthesiologist came by to explain the procedures and risks, his voice professionally calm as he outlined everything that would happen once Catherine was unconscious. Catherine listened to it all with the same composed attention she brought to state dinners and royal engagements, asking intelligent questions and nodding at appropriate moments. But Carole could see the fear hiding behind her daughter's royal training, the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when certain words were mentioned. "The good news," the anesthesiologist said before leaving, "is that this is exactly the kind of surgery we do regularly. Your surgical team has performed this procedure hundreds of times. You're in excellent hands." After he left, Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, she looked at her mother with the expression she had worn as a 6-year-old getting ready for her first day of school. "I'm scared, Mummy," she admitted in a small voice. Carole squeezed her hand tighter. "I know, sweetheart, and that's completely normal. Anyone would be scared. But you're the bravest person I know, and you're going to get through this beautifully. What if something goes wrong?" The words came out in a rush, as if Catherine had been holding them back for days. What if the children lose their mother? What if William has to raise them alone? What if I never get to see them grow up? It was William who answered, his voice strong and sure. "Nothing's going to go wrong. And even if something unexpected happens, we'll handle it together. We always have." The three of them spent the next hour sharing memories that had nothing to do with surgery or hospitals. They talked about Catherine's childhood obsession with horses, about the disastrous camping trip when she was 12, and it rained for 3 days straight, about her graduation day, when she had been so nervous about her speech that she had called Carole at 5 in the morning for reassurance. "Do you remember," Catherine said with a small smile, "when I was 8 and I broke my arm falling out of that tree? I was so convinced I was going to die that I made you promise to give my favorite stuffed rabbit to Pippa." Carole laughed softly. "You also made me promise to tell Mrs. Peterson that you were sorry for breaking her garden gnome the week before." "I was a very thorough child," Catherine said, and for a moment she sounded exactly like herself again, confident and slightly amused at her own intensity. The surgeon appeared in the doorway at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed in surgical scrubs and radiating the kind of calm competence that came from years of practice. Dr. Richardson was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, the sort of person who inspired immediate confidence. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Ready to get this over with," Catherine replied, and Carole could hear the forced lightness in her voice. "That's exactly what I like to hear. We're going to take excellent care of you, and I'll speak with your family as soon as we're finished. I expect everything to go very smoothly." The next few minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Nurses adjusted equipment and checked monitors while Catherine was moved onto a gurney for the trip to the operating room. Carole walked alongside the gurney as far as the family was allowed to go, holding Catherine's hand and murmuring words of love and encouragement. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she promised again, the same words she had spoken the night before. Catherine squeezed her hand one last time. "I love you, Mummy. Thank you for being here. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." The doors to the surgical suite swung closed, and suddenly, Catherine was gone, disappeared behind barriers that no amount of maternal love could cross. Carole stood staring at those doors for a long moment before William's gentle hand on her arm guided her back toward the family waiting room. The waiting room became their world for the next 7 hours. It was a comfortable space with soft lighting and upholstered chairs, designed to make anxious families feel as peaceful as possible while their loved ones underwent surgery. Fresh flowers sat on every table, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Michael brought coffee and tea from the small kitchen area, while William paced the room with nervous energy he couldn't quite contain. Carole sat in the chair closest to the door, as if being nearer to the corridor might somehow bring news faster. Pippa and James arrived around noon, their faces tight with worry despite their attempts to maintain normal conversation. The family clustered together in the way they had always done during difficult times, finding comfort in each other's presence even when words felt inadequate. "Remember when Catherine insisted on learning to drive in that old Mini?" James said during one particularly long stretch of silence. She was so determined to master the manual transmission that she practiced in the driveway for hours. "She stalled it 17 times in a row," Pippa added, managing a small smile at the memory. "But she refused to give up." "That's our Catherine," Michael said quietly. "She never gives up on anything." The afternoon stretched endlessly. Dr. Richardson had warned them that the surgery could take anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, depending on what she found once she began operating. Every minute that passed felt like evidence that something was going wrong, even though logically they all knew that longer surgery didn't necessarily mean more complicated surgery. At 3 o'clock, a nurse appeared with an update. "Dr. Richardson asked me to let you know that everything is proceeding normally. The princess is doing well, and they expect to be finished within the next few hours." It was the first news they had received since the surgery began, and the relief in the room was almost tangible. Carole felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, though she knew she wouldn't truly relax until she saw Catherine awake and recovering. William disappeared for half an hour to make phone calls, updating his father and the necessary palace officials about Catherine's condition. When he returned, he looked slightly more relaxed, as if sharing the burden of worry had made it more manageable. "How are the children?" Carole asked. "They think Mummy is at a work engagement that will keep her away for a few days. Maria is with them, and she'll bring them by to visit once Catherine is feeling better." As the afternoon wore on, the family fell into the rhythm of hospital waiting. They took turns getting fresh air, brought each other cups of tea, and maintained the kind of light conversation that filled silence without requiring too much emotional energy. But underneath it all was the constant awareness that Catherine was somewhere in the building, unconscious and vulnerable, depending on the skill of strangers to make her well again. At 6:30, just as the winter sun was beginning to set, Dr. Richardson finally appeared in the waiting room doorway. She was still in her surgical scrubs, but her face wore the expression of someone who had good news to share. "The surgery went beautifully," she said before anyone could ask. "Everything we found was exactly what we expected, and we were able to address the issue completely. The princess tolerated the anesthesia very well, and she's already beginning to wake up in recovery." The relief that flooded through Carole was so intense it made her dizzy. She reached for Michael's hand and held on tight, feeling tears of gratitude sting her eyes. "When can we see her?" William asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "She'll be moved to her room within the hour. She'll be groggy from the anesthesia for a while, but she should be fairly alert by this evening." After Dr. Richardson left to check on her patient, the family hugged each other with the fervor of people who had been holding their breath for hours. Catherine was safe, the surgery was over, and the long process of recovery could finally begin. As they waited to be called to Catherine's room, Carole allowed herself to think ahead for the first time all day. There would be weeks of healing, careful attention to wound care and pain management, and gradual return to the activities that made up Catherine's normal life. But all of that felt manageable now that the immediate danger had passed. The hardest part was over. Now came the part that mothers understood best, the patient, devoted work of helping someone heal. The corridor leading to Catherine's room seemed longer than it had that morning, though Carole knew it was exactly the same distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she followed the nurse, William beside her, and the rest of the family close behind. 7 hours of waiting had built up so much nervous energy that she felt almost lightheaded with anticipation. "She's awake, but drowsy," the nurse explained as they walked. "The anesthesia can make patients feel confused for a few hours after surgery this extensive. She may not remember much of your first visit, which is completely normal." They stopped outside the familiar door marked only with a number. The nurse knocked softly before pushing it open, and Carole stepped inside to find Catherine lying propped up against several pillows, her eyes closed but her face peaceful in the soft light of early evening. The sight of her daughter hit Carole like a physical blow, not because Catherine looked worse than expected, but because she looked so completely, utterly alive. The monitors beside the bed beeped steadily, confirming what Carole could see for herself. Catherine was breathing, her heart was beating, and the surgery was truly over. Catherine's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps, and it took a moment for her gaze to focus on the faces gathered around her bed. When she saw Carole, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Mummy," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed just an hour earlier. "You stayed?" "Of course I stayed," Carole said, moving to Catherine's bedside and reaching for her hand. Her daughter's fingers felt warmer now, more like themselves, though they trembled slightly with residual effects from the anesthesia. "I promised I would be here when you woke up." Catherine's eyes drifted to William, who leaned down to kiss her forehead gently. "How do you feel, darling?" "Like I've been run over by a truck," Catherine admitted with a weak laugh that ended in a slight wince. "But alive. Definitely alive." The simple words carried so much weight that Carole felt fresh tears threatening. They were the words every mother longed to hear after watching their child disappear behind surgical doors. Alive. Safe. Getting better. Dr. Richardson appeared in the doorway, checking on her patient one final time before heading home for the evening. "Everything looks excellent," she reported after examining Catherine's incision site and checking her vital signs. "Pain management is working well, and all your numbers look exactly where we want them to be." "When can I go home?" Catherine asked, though her words were slightly slurred with exhaustion. "Let's take it one day at a time. You've had major surgery, Your Royal Highness. Your body needs time to heal properly. I'd say at least a week in hospital, probably longer depending on how quickly you recover." After the doctor left, Catherine dozed fitfully while her family kept quiet vigil around her bed. The effects of the anesthesia made her drift in and out of consciousness, sometimes opening her eyes to look around in confusion before remembering where she was and why. During one of these wakeful periods, Catherine looked directly at Carole with more clarity than she had shown since the surgery. "I was so scared I wouldn't see you again," she admitted quietly. "Oh, sweetheart," Carole breathed, squeezing Catherine's hand gently. "You never have to worry about that. I'm not going anywhere." "I kept thinking about the children," Catherine continued, her voice getting stronger as the fog of anesthesia continued to lift. About how young they still are, how much they still need their mother. George is only starting to understand what it means that his parents have these particular jobs. Charlotte and Louis are practically babies still. Carole felt her heart break a little at the vulnerability in her daughter's voice. Catherine had always been the responsible one, the child who worried about everyone else before herself. It made perfect sense that even facing surgery, her first thoughts would be about her children's well-being rather than her own fear. They're going to grow up with their mother, Carole said firmly. A healthy, strong mother who loves them more than life itself. This surgery was about making sure of that. William had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. The children have been asking about you constantly. They want to make you get well cards, and Charlotte has been practicing her reading so she can read you stories when you come home. For the first time since waking up, Catherine's smile reached her eyes. Really? Really? Louis keeps asking if Mummy's tummy hurts and whether kisses will make it better. Kisses always make everything better, Catherine said with more of her usual warmth. At least according to the official Mummy handbook. The evening visiting hours passed quietly. Pippa and James took turns sitting beside Catherine's bed, sharing gentle conversation about nothing particularly important. Michael dozed in his chair, the stress of the day finally catching up with him now that the crisis had passed. The room felt peaceful in the way that hospital rooms rarely do, filled with the quiet satisfaction of family gathered around someone they love who is finally, definitely going to be all right. Around 9 o'clock, Catherine began showing signs of real alertness for the first time since surgery. Her eyes stayed open for longer periods, and she was able to follow conversations without drifting off mid-sentence. "I feel like myself again," she announced suddenly, as if the thought surprised her. "Sore and tired, but like myself. That's the anesthesia finally wearing off completely," the evening nurse explained as she checked Catherine's for and made notes on her chart. "You should feel more and more normal over the next day or two. Though normal is relative when you're recovering from major surgery." As the family prepared to leave for the night, Catherine caught Carole's hand. "Thank you for being here," she said seriously. "I know this disrupted your whole life, dropping everything to come stay in London." "Don't be ridiculous," Carole replied, leaning down to smooth Catherine's hair away from her face in a gesture that was purely maternal. "There is nowhere else in the world I would rather be than right here with you. I love you, Mummy. I love you too, my darling girl. More than you could possibly imagine." The hotel room felt different that night. The crushing weight of worry had lifted, replaced by the much more manageable challenge of supporting Catherine through her recovery. Carole finally slept deeply for the first time in days, her dreams filled with images of Catherine laughing and healthy, chasing her children through the gardens at Amber Hall. The next morning brought crisp sunshine and the promise of visiting hours at 10 o'clock. Carole woke feeling more optimistic than she had in days, eager to see how Catherine was progressing after her first full night of post-surgical sleep. They found Catherine sitting up in bed, looking remarkably more like herself. Her color was better, her eyes were bright and alert, and she was even wearing a touch of lip balm that made her look less like a hospital patient and more like the poised woman the world knew as the Princess of Wales. "You look wonderful," Carole said, meaning every word. The transformation from the previous evening was remarkable. "I feel human again," Catherine replied. "Still sore, obviously, but definitely human. And hungry, which the nurses say is an excellent sign." They spent the morning talking about practical things. How long Catherine would need to stay in hospital, what her recovery at home would look like, when she would be able to return to her royal duties. It felt good to discuss the future with confidence again, to make plans that assumed Catherine would be completely healthy in a few weeks. William brought pictures that the children had drawn, get-well cards decorated with stickers, and crayon drawings of rainbows and flowers. Catherine examined each one carefully, pointing out details and asking William to remember to tell each child specifically what she loved about their artwork. "George drew this one of our family," William explained, holding up a picture that showed 5 stick figures standing in front of what might have been a house or a castle. He made sure to include Orla, though not sure why the dog appears to be purple. Catherine laughed, the first real laugh Carole had heard from her since before the surgery. It was a beautiful sound, full of life and joy and the promise of complete recovery. As the days passed, Catherine grew stronger and more like herself. The initial post-surgical weakness gave way to restlessness, and soon she was asking when she could get out of bed, when she could walk around the room, when she could finally go home to her own space and her children. But for Carole, that first moment of seeing Catherine awake after surgery remained the most powerful memory. It was the moment when fear transformed into relief, when the worst-case scenarios that had haunted her imagination were replaced by the reality of her daughter's strength and resilience. Watching Catherine recover reminded Carole of something she had always known but sometimes forgot in the whirlwind of royal life and public responsibilities. Underneath all the titles and protocols, Catherine was still her daughter, the little girl she had raised to be brave and kind and determined. Surgery couldn't change that, just as royal duties couldn't erase the fundamental bonds of family. 2 weeks later, when Catherine was finally released from hospital and returned home to begin the next phase of her recovery, Carole helped her settle into her own bed, surrounded by flowers from well-wishers around the world. The children climbed carefully onto the bed to snuggle with their mother, and the house felt alive again with the sounds of family life. "Thank you," Catherine said quietly as Carole adjusted her pillows and made sure she had everything she needed within reach. "For all of it. For being there, for staying with me, for reminding me that I'm not just the Princess of Wales. I'm your daughter, and that matters just as much." Carole kissed her forehead, the same way she had when Catherine was small and recovering from childhood illnesses. "Being your mother is the most important job I'll ever have," she said simply. "Everything else is just details." Outside, London continued its busy life, unaware that in one quiet house, a family was celebrating the simple miracle of being together and healthy. The surgery was behind them, the recovery was progressing beautifully, and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility. For Carole Middleton, the mother who had watched her daughter face her greatest fear with courage and grace, there was no greater happiness than this. All her children safe, healthy, and home where they belonged.